Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review is brought to you in part by Dean's Hobby Stop in Owasso, Michigan. Dean's has one of the Midwest's largest selections of used kits at great prices. They also feature new kits and supplies as well. Call Dean's to get their mail order list featuring hundreds of vintage kits, or check their website for great deals on both new and classic models. This review covers the 32 Ford Street Rod. It's a 125 scale kit from Monogram, number 0882. Now, when most people picture a hot rod, they immediately think of the early Ford Roadsters like this one. And when the soldiers returned from World War II, they turned the old Fords into hot rods to popularize the era because they were cheap, light, and would accept a V8 engine. Now, this kit's roots stem from the mid-50s Monogram kits and have been reissued many times over the years. It's rated for the intermediate skill builder, probably because there's a few fragile parts and the big decals. But it's really able to be built by almost anybody with a few kits under their belt. It has 75 pieces molded in white and clear with chrome-plated parts and soft black vinyl tires. It also includes some colorful flame decals. When you're done, the finished dimensions are about 6.5 inches long, 3 inches wide, and 2 3/4 inches high. Hey, you hear that? That's Newt. He's our program director, and he's tapping on the glass divider. He's got a question, so come on in here, Newt, and what's up?
Whoa, that's crazy cool, man. I'd have to say those flames are right on.
Here are the contents of the kit. You can see there's a few nice sprues there. Monogram did a good job cleaning those up, and you even get a t-shirt decal to put aside on the seat there. We'll be using mostly, slow setting tube glue or liquid cement. Sometimes, some CA glue for the fragile parts, or even white glue for the windows. Now, remember, heed the manufacturer's use and safety guidelines when you use any of the products you see or hear in the review. So here are those decals. They're a little bit thicker, they're a little stiff, so use plenty of warm water when you're softening these up and putting them in place. But the register is good and the color is great. The first thing that I did was to assemble the hood and the radiator shroud in place on the body, along with the body shell and the chassis. And that's so that everything was in an alignment. I used some Duplicolor primer filler, and it's always a good idea to put the pieces of the body panels together and then spray them all at once to avoid shading issues. So after I cleaned up all the parts of imperfections and parting lines, etc., I let the kit dry with the primer in place. Now, of course, we've deviated from the instructions, and I think that that's important in this case because I'm using number layers of paint, and I need to give the body a good amount of drying time to make sure it's thoroughly dry before I handle it. Now, as you can see, after a light wet sanding of the primer and then drying it off, I painted it with a base coat of silver spray, just a regular tester 1246, and that's going to act as a base, a reflective base for my metallic kind of a candy paint. Now, with the silver base dry, I gave the body all assembled a coat of a thin coat of 1631 Tester's burgundy purple metallic. It's a really nice look, and it'll contrast the flame graphics. And a couple of tack coats and then a couple of wet coats, and she was done with a nice shine. And now we'll get back to the engine, gather the pieces up and begin assembly, put the block halves together, and notice there's no separate oil pan, so the bottom of the engine will have that seam there that you'll have to address if you're going to make a contest model for out of this one. Working a little bit ahead here, I see the chrome air cleaner on the sprue tree there, so I cut that out and cleaned up the sprue attachment, and I put it in a bottle cap with some bleach that just comes up to the top of the air cleaner. That way I get a nice white paper filter look, and the air cleaner still has chrome on the top. I painted the engine block red, the distributor flat black, and then the transmission was an aluminum steel color. And then I added some black wash. That's just 50-50 thinner and black paint to bring out the highlights of the engine. So follow the instructions. You can see here there's some highlights on the valve covers, and of course the nice chrome pieces for the alternator. You got a flat black belt and pulley system and some steel exhaust pipes. So put that together and let that dry. Make sure that the exhausts are symmetrical. And now I started working on the interior. There's some ejector pin marks up at the top of the seat. You may want to fill those and sand them smooth. And there's also some down in the carpeting area, which you can either cover with flocking or just paint a matte finish so it's not so noticeable. I used a red wash to bring out the Ford script on the hubcaps, and that's really just made from a drop each of some red acrylic paint and some warm water and a little bit of dish soap. You mix those thoroughly, brush it on as you see on the right side there, and then after it dries you lightly rub off the hubcap, leaving the wash inside the script for a nice look. And now we can work on the wheel assembly. I used the a light sandpaper and to scuff the tread a little bit, and then of course you got your inner wheel ring, that's flat black, and the chrome wheel and hubcap that go on the outside. You just squeeze them together and make sure though that you scrape any paint or chrome from areas that need to be glued together for good adhesion. And now we'll get ready to decal the model, and before we do that though, I used some tape to mask off the running boards, and then I painted those flat black. You can spray them or hand brush them if you want to mask the area. And then I'm going to use a lot of warm water to start staging our decaling. And now I started here with these fender flames, and this is probably the reason for a number 2 rating for intermediate skill level. They're very rounded, and the decals are a bit on the thick side, so you'll need to use some of the softening solution to get those to conform. It took about 4 coats, and after every one I just kind of smoothed any wrinkles out over the fenders, but they actually laid down very nicely in the end. When I went to apply the large door decals, I noticed that, of course, the lower hinge interfered with the decal. So I noted where it went after I put it into position. And then I used a small hobby knife to cut a slit right where that was to go over the door hinge. And then your setting solution will help bring that down onto the body, and you won't even notice it. But once again, use plenty of warm water to soften and place the decal into position. Also note I put a little chrome foil on the door handle there. And now cut this decal out of the decal sheet with the paper still on it. We're not going to use it as a water slide. We're just going to cut it out and use a little bit of white glue to glue it into place on the dash there. Also note that the drop down post bracket for the steering wheel and column is painted black. Once all the decals were thoroughly dried, I went and gave the body and the fenders, etc., a coat of clear, duplicolor clear, to seal in the decals and give it a good shine. And you'll also notice that I painted the running boards here because I went back over them with some flat, clear flat later on. Install the front suspension pieces. Most of these were painted flat black, and of course just scrape the paint off where you're going to glue surfaces together. There's not much surface, so you want a good clean gluing point. And then assemble those according to the instructions. And by the way, those are also at the end of this review if you need to review those. And once again, you can see that the suspension is mostly flat black. The fuel tank was painted aluminum. I wanted a little contrast back there. Usually they're painted body color, but also the pieces go together very nicely. You still need to make sure that you've got a good gluing point, and put those into position according to your instructions. Now the fuel tank is a bit of a compromise here. You can see the silver portion, that's the frame rail that's attached to the bottom of the tank, and then the top of the tank is attached to the chassis, and that's the black rail with the white square there. Now if you want this to look pretty nice, you'll have to clean up the mate there. Obviously the top rail is a little higher than the chassis rail, so you'd need to mate those up and then maybe fill that gap in, and even perhaps paint the whole frame portions then black. Now we'll mate the engine into position there on the mounts and locate those and make sure they're clear of paint, and then simultaneously put the transmission into the drive shaft at the back there and glue that into position, making sure that it's sitting straight up and vertical. We can add the exhaust now using the mounting stems that go into the chassis, and they're unpainted here so they'll adhere. But you can touch all those pieces up later with some flat black. Now the mufflers are molded with open sides, which you'd need to fill if you want a really nice look. And there's some ejector pin marks on the inside of the engine pipes, so you can address those as required. Snap those wheels into position on the mounting pegs on the axles, and you've got a nice clean running chassis here. The extensions are added to the exhaust pipes, and then we're going to turn her over, and like I said, I'm going to use some clear flat to paint those running boards to make sure that they look authentic. And now you can use some slow setting glue to glue that dashboard into position under the cowl, and just make sure that it has a slight upward angle to it to accept the steering mast. Add the steering wheel and the shifter to the interior, and then we can turn that over and scrape a little glue from the back edge there, and then you can position the interior into place with some good strong glue. I use a little epoxy here, and make sure that you use the small pegs at the rear as positive stops for location. Glue the body and the radiator shell into place, and then add the spreader bar up front there, the grill, and the radiator cap to the front end. You can see the arrows pointing to the area where you need to scrape that chrome away from the windshield mounting points, and then use a little white glue to assemble the windshield into the frame. And here's what the completed assembly looks like, along with the side glass there, and I added the Maltese cross emblems to that for a cool effect. And what you see here is a comparison between the kit supplied grab handles, that's the chrome piece at the bottom, and some wire that I just bent and painted with some purple to match the car. I wanted a little more realism there, so I just super glued those into position. And now, as much as it hurts, we have to scrape off some of that nice looking paint to glue the license plate frame there. And also note that in the middle of the bumper there's a black strip, and that was done with some of that craft paint just like we painted the hubcaps. So go ahead and glue the license plate of your choice to the frame, and you just use some white glue and cut it out. Don't use it, apply it as a water slide decal. Just glue it into place with white glue, and then use a little slow setting cement to glue the plate frame to the body. Make sure it's symmetrically positioned in the middle. And now get out the tail light stalks there and paint the ends where the lenses would be with some clear red, and then scrape the glue and put those into position on the fenders. Well, there you have it. Your kit's complete. And this great looking little easy to build kit is still available online, etc. And it builds very easily, very nicely. The only difficult part is probably just putting the decals on, and pretty much everything else is straightforward. Once you get it together, though, it's a real head turner. I mean, and if you need a roadster for your shelf, this is a nice one to start with, that's for sure. It's almost as exciting building this kit as feeling that wind at the top end, going 120 miles with the top down in a roadster like this. And if I were you, I'd find one, buy it, and put it on my shelf. We hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand of any of our reviews. And you could also find us on Facebook or our website, rideonreplicas.com. Thanks!